Hello, we're back in the Silas Diary, the first diary of the first century diaries by Gene Edwards, looking at chapter 4 today. By noon the next day, a furious wind had blown in from the north. A storm is coming, Saul said wryly. Do you think it will rain? Asked Mark. I'd hope it would hold off till tomorrow, but it will be today. Are we in danger? Always in weather that does not obey its own signs. Yes, Mark, we must move as quickly as possible. Find a way to lighten your load. The two men shared their last moment as Mark dumped the entire contents of one bag while thunder and lightning joined a howling wind. By nightfall, the two men were seeing hints of snow and sleet. We can't walk much farther, Saul. I can hardly see the road. We walk or we court death, was Saul's response. Do you think it's that bad? Our only hope is the way station. The men moved on in silence, pausing only to verify their way, sometimes finding it only by brief flashes of lightning. The temperature was falling. We are near, Mark. Do you see the way station? No, but there are no trees, a sure sign we are near a way station. Let's pick up the pace. The intermittent rain and snow were turning into unbearable sleet. There it is, exclaimed Mark. Breathing hard, the two men passed through the unguarded gate. The lightning revealed a courtyard with 3 walls. The 4th wall was actually a series of windowless rooms. It certainly is several hundred years old, muttered Saul. In the middle of the courtyard were several men huddled around a large fire, all slumped and motionless. Saul walked over to the fire and began warming himself. Then he reached down into the satchel he had been carrying and withdrew 2 leather coats, each with a hood. Here, put this on, John Mark. Saul put on his leather coat, moved as close to the fire as possible, sat down and pulled the hood over his head. Then, like the others, he slumped forward and rested his head on his knees. In the midst of the storm's howling sleet, Mark was confused. The rooms, he said. Why aren't we going into those rooms? One of the strangers stood, looked suddenly at Mark, stirred the fire with a stick, and then sat down again. Saul motioned Mark to his side. There are no doors on those rooms, and there haven't been for at least 100 years. The doors were ripped off a century ago and used for firewood. Also, the roofs leak. Further, no sane man would go in there. There may be thieves in there waiting to cut your throat, or one might just follow you in there after you fall asleep. The floor is dirt, and the straw hasn't been changed for years. It is filthy beyond knowing. But worst of all, there are vermin and rats. The worst vermin are the lice. Now, sit down and try to stay warm until this freeze passes. But it stinks. The fire stinks. That's because what you see burning is dried dung. Now sit. I will take the first watch, you the second. Get some sleep. Mark pulled his leather covering about him, lowered the hood over his head, muttered something, and fell asleep. Soon the men were covered with snow and sleet. Late in the night the winds cut sharper, and the cold grew even more severe as the fire waned. Saul rose and left the courtyard to scavenge for wood. After a long absence he returned to a fire not much more than embers, sparingly, only a little wood at a time. It would still be a long night, said one of the men sitting nearby. Hearing those words, Mark shot to his feet, said something about preferring to die swiftly at the hands of a cutthroat thief, and then stumbled over to one of the empty rooms. He stuck his head in one and then in another, finally disappearing into one of them. Inside he pushed himself against one of the walls, lowering his head and hood, and waited for sleep to deliver him from his agony. Are you going to let him stay in there? One of the men asked Saul. He must learn, but I'm afraid he has chosen a poor way to do so. At first light of day, Mark came running out of the room, screaming at the top of his voice. They're all over me, he cried, shaking his hair and hitting his arms and legs. But I can't see them. What are they? He asked, walking right into the smoking embers. Lice, laughed an old man. What can I do to get rid of them? You might try drowning yourself. Not too many lice can live at the bottom of the sea. Is there anything else I can do to get rid of these things? Mark asked again amidst rancorous laughter. Shave your head, Saul answered honestly. but his voice betrayed his amusement. The two men gathered up their few belongings, Mark giving to the other travelers all but the last of their food. "Next time we get a mule," grumbled Mark as the two men set out on a road now covered with sleet and water. Late in the afternoon, cold beyond description, they finally arrived at Citium, where they were warmly greeted by the anxious brothers and sisters. They were quickly whisked off to the warmth of the house where they would be staying. Everyone, including Barnabas, who had arrived the night before, was amazed that Saul and Mark had braved this weather and lived.